people, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for always coming back. Hope you're well in all that you do and you're loving yourself and others like always. Today we're going to talk about the book of Giants, the Fallen Watchers, and the rest of them. These are parts. This is also part of the book that was removed from the original Bible, the book of Giants, right? Which explains even the Gospel of Enoch itself. The book of Enoch itself also talks about a little bit about the Watchers, the fallen angels, how they came to earth, and they had affairs with the sons of men, and they gave birth to giants and monsters. It also says a lot about that. When these things happened, that we started having things like that. You see, there's what they call centaurs, right? I don't know if I get that right. That's part horse and part human. Like from the waist upward is that of a human being, and then from the waist or from the chest? Yeah, from the waist downward is that of a horse, right? These are things that happened when the fallen angels deliberately had affairs with the sons of men. Now we had people that were giants. They were hefty, tall, very, very tall human beings, and then they have extra human power. These were the parts that they touch a little bit of. The Bible is just, the present Bible we have is just the tip of the iceberg of what is really there. They just touch some tips, and that is why most of the things, some of the things, when you read them in the Bible, it's incomplete. It doesn't make sense. I don't know how far you've studied the Bible, but there are some parts when you study them, it doesn't make sense because it's not complete. They just picked some word and they added it up there. Now the story of these giants and how it's just that part of the book of Genesis chapter 6 verse I think they're around 4, right? Now that little part is just what they took, but there's a whole lot of stories, that they do not want us to know of. They want us to see but not to understand, right? That's what we call hidden in plain sight.
Namely, the book of Giants says that 200 donkeys, 200 asses, 200 rams of the flock, 200 goats, 200 beasts of the field, from every animal, from every bird, and there's some missing fragments here, so it's naming other animals that we don't have in the text because they're missing. But all of these 200 of all the things I just mentioned were selected for miscegenation. And the word miscegenation means, it refers to the mixing of races or species, particularly in the context of sexual intercourse. So everybody just let that sink in for a minute. These watchers, these angelic beings, fallen angelic beings, purposely selected 200. They chose certain species of animals, including birds. I'm guessing that the missing fragments are also going to identify reptiles and fish and all other kind of all other species as well. But what we have here is a handful of animals that these watchers selected, and they selected 200 of each one. Why? Because there were 200 of them. There were 200 fallen watchers. And so they made sure that every single one of them, of the fallen watchers, would be able to inseminate each kind of species that was selected. Think about that. Think about how calculated and intentional this is, what they're doing. I mean, it is devious. It's absolutely maniacal. They're purposely trying to generate monsters. And that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what the result is. It says, so let me make this clear again. This term, miscegenation, is referring to the mixing of races and species, particularly in the context of sexual intercourse, which means they probably were having sex with these animals. And for people who have a problem with that, hey, listen, we barely understand the physics. We barely understand the physics that we're working with as the human race. There's no way that we could even begin to understand the physics that angels work with and that they understand. So making things bigger, smaller, transforming themselves into different shapes and different animals or whatever, that's all possible for these guys. So that answers the question of how. Now, these guys, these fallen angels, these watchers, they were not mixing species in terms of interspecies breeding like you would do with two dogs. We're talking about extreme cross-species genetics involving the seed of the angels themselves. We're not just talking about the angels taking, like I said, a donkey and let's say a bird or a goat and somehow getting them to copulate. That's not what we're talking about. The Book of Giants says, it spells out that these angels purposely selected these creatures so that they could insert their own seed into them. And it's unequivocal that it was their own seed, because the result is that these animals conceived monsters, not just monsters, sentient monsters. We're going to get to that in a minute. So here's another fragment from the Book of Giants explaining this. They defiled, they begot giants and monsters. Speaking of the fallen watchers, they begot, and behold, the whole earth was corrupted. Now, that word defiled is often used not only throughout the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament, but also in all these ancient manuscripts. It's often used specifically to describe sexual sin, that they were sexually defiling these animals and life on earth. And so it's important to note, and this is a really provocative part to me, it's important to note that not only were giants begotten of the fallen angels, but also monsters. And that is the term in the Book of Giants, monsters. Remember, not just one kind of monsters. We're talking about a litany of animals, of animals and birds and probably reptiles and fish that they inserted their angelic seed into. And people are going to say, well, as Steve mentioned earlier, the what I think is the most lame argument in the world, well, angels, the Bible says angels don't marry. Who's talking about marriage? We're just talking about getting it on with whatever these guys could get their hands on. Nobody's talking about marriage. They didn't marry the animals. They just inseminated them. They're going around inseminating everything. Why? Everything all life, basically. The Bible literally says all flesh was corrupted. So they're inseminating everything. And I want you to remember something, is that if you take a goat, for example, and you do cross-species genetics on that goat, and if you do it properly, the creature that will come as a result, let's say of a goat and a pig, the creature that will come as a result, if you do it properly, will be able to procreate and will be able to then pass down those genes, those genetic markers, into their offspring. So it wasn't just that they just went out and chose a handful of animals, they wanted to screw around with them for sexual pleasure and to progenerate monsters. They knew that by doing this, they would infect all life on the planet, because those monsters would then procreate and create more monsters. It's a domino effect.
You discover, you hear and hear. Now, why do you think that there are some certain categories of human beings that still feel this connection to animals? Like doing the same things that these fallen angels did. Like it was, like we heard, it's like the corrupted all flesh. When they came down, they corrupted all flesh. And that was why monsters of such kind was created. Now the idea was just to create, they want to implant their seed into everything that was living on the face of the earth. Both the fishes in the sea, that is why we have mermaids, right? The animals on the land, centaurs. We have centaurs, we have some dogs that have human form, we have some other animals, you can name them. We have goats that are more of a human being. You get the point. Both the birds in the air, you see some birds that are more of a donkey, some birds that are more of a human being. You know, all these monsters that you can think about was produced at that moment when these fallen angels defiled everything on the face of the earth. Now, this is the answer to most of the questions that we have in our hearts. Now, you know, in some films, in some movies, they get to show some of these things, but they don't tell us why these things are like that. And then you see a lot of persons wondering, how did it happen? Now, to what I was saying before, why do you think that some categories of human being still feel this connection to still venture into this what do they call it, this misdegenation that was explained? Like, you see a human being having desire for an animal, like want to mate with an animal and have a seed from an animal. There are people like that, and these are still the descendants of these people. Like I was saying in one video like that, when we were talking about this mixture of genes, when I said they were having tails, it is because we mixed with them that these tails these tails gradually started disappearing, because some of them, up to about some centuries not long ago, were still born with tails. They had to cut out the tails at the point of birth. And a lot of persons are like, they're not really okay with that. Can you see this now? So even the reptiles were defiled, and there were some that were now like human beings with tails. Now that is where you see some persons still have this connection to those things, because they have the blood in them. They have the blood in them. It's the mixture. When they did these things, a lot of evil was done at the process. And even till today, somewhere, somehow, because the world you think you know is more than what we see. It is what they want us to see that we see. Behind the ice wall, there are kingdoms, and people are beginning to discover it. Behind the ice wall, behind Antarctica, there is a big world separately there that we don't even know the type of beings that are still living in there. Now, it's like a no-go area. They don't allow people get there just like that, because you can ask those that even get closer to that place. They don't allow people get into Antarctica like that. Now, what are they hiding in there? What is that is hidden in Antarctica that people are prevented from getting to see? There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that we have not discovered. There are some beings somewhere that still exist, and that is why there are restricted places around the world that you cannot just get into. You cannot just get into. They know what they are doing. There's a lot of lies that we have been believing, because some persons are there manipulating things. Leave your comment and thought there in the section, and I'll see you in my next one. Until then, love yourself, love others, stay safe, stay positive. Bye for now.